Well, we're going to get back to our story of Abram and Sarai, and they've had a son. His name is Isaac. It doesn't really say in the Bible, but this next section takes place when Isaac is a boy, and it doesn't say how old he is, probably around 12, 13, let's just say, but it doesn't really say that in the Bible. This is it's a very strange story in the Bible. For some people it doesn't make sense, but we're going to try to make sense of it to you. But it certainly is one of the most popular stories of the Bible. It's when Abraham is told by God to take his own son and sacrifice him. And you kind of sort of heard the story before. Let's read it in the Bible. It's Genesis chapter 22, starting at verse 1. It says, the sacrifice of Isaac. God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham. And Abraham said, Here I am. Then he said, Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains from which I will tell you. So Abraham rose up early in the morning and saddled his donkey, and took 2 of his young men with him, and Isaac his son, and he split the wood for the burnt offering, and arose and went to the place that God had told him. Then on the 3rd day Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place from a distance. So let's just pause for a second and tell you. God tells him something that I want you to remember, okay? Look what he says in verse 2. Take your son, your only son, whom you love. And then he tells him to bring him up to the mountain. You know, we're going to mention this several times during this course, but in the Old Testament of the Bible, quite often, people had to make sacrifices to God using usually a firstborn male animal. And here is his, I just want to say it again, Ishmael was not the intended son for Abraham. Isaac was, because he says, take your son, the one you love, and sacrifice him. Okay, so Abraham said to his young men, stay here with the donkey. The boy and I will go over there and worship and then return to you. So this is kind of unusual because God has told him to take his son to this mountaintop and sacrifice him. But then he tells the 2 servants that are with him, just stay here and we're going to be back. So we don't know if Abraham knew that his son was not going to be sacrificed, but that's what he tells them. In verse 6 he says, Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on Isaac his son. And he took the fire in his hand and the knife. So the 2 of them walked on together. But Isaac spoke to Abraham his father and said, let's just pause for a second. Isaac is having to carry the wood on his own back that he's going to have to lay on top of to be sacrificed. And I just want to point that out to you. So then he says, walking up this mountain, he says, hey, my father, I've got a question here. And Abraham says, what is it? And he says, here is the fire and here's the wood, but where's the lamb for the burnt offering? Because they normally would sacrifice a firstborn male lamb. Abraham said, my son, God will provide for himself the lamb for the burnt offering. So the 2 of them went together. Again, we're not mind readers. We don't know exactly what Abraham is thinking here. But he says, God will provide the lamb for a burnt offering. Then they came to the place that God had told him. So Abraham built an altar there, and he arranged the wood, and he bound Isaac his son and laid him on the altar, on the wood. Then Abraham stretched out his hand and took the knife to slay his own son. But the angel of the Lord called out to him from heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. And Abraham said, here I am. And then he said, do not lay your hands on the boy or do anything to him, because now I know you fear God, seeing you have not withheld your only son from me. So speaking on behalf of God, the angel says, pretty much paraphrase, you've passed the test. We can see that you are going to sacrifice your own son, and you've passed the test. Then Abraham lifted up his eyes, and he looked, and behind him was a ram caught in a thicket by his horns. So Abraham went, and he took the ram and offered him up as a burnt offering in the place of his son. Here are three things to remember about this story. We're going to keep this segment really brief. God told Abraham to take your son, your only son whom you love, to be sacrificed. I just want to say this and maybe repeat it a few times. Most biblical experts believe that this is a prelude to the sacrifice of Jesus on the cross, because it took place in pretty much the same place on earth, and it begins with God saying, take your son, your only son, whom you love. And that's exactly how we refer to Jesus, because when Jesus was baptized, God said, this is my son whom I love. Let's go farther. Second, Abraham said and his son both agreed without hesitation. We always like to point that out. Neither one says, wait a minute, I'm not doing this. And the son even, think about it, you're a teenager, let's say preteen, wouldn't you throw the wood down and say, no, I don't like this plan? But he just walked up the mountain with his dad. Third, God not only provided a perfect substitute sacrifice in the place of Isaac, but he also blessed both of them. He blessed both of them. Here's some teaching notes to ponder. Most Bible teachers consider this event to be a prelude to the sacrifice Jesus made for all mankind. He was the Lamb of God who was sacrificed for us. And here we have a picture of Abraham about to sacrifice his son. Hard to see, but he's got a knife in his right hand there. His son is lying on this pile of wood here. And then if you notice in the thicket right there behind him, in that little bush, there is the ram that God is going to substitute for him. That's our short segment for today. I know that we had 2 long segments previously, and so here's your reward. I hope you enjoyed this story. It's a very famous story, Abraham and his son Isaac and the sacrifice, or near sacrifice in this case, right?